Clara Whitaker pressed her trembling palm flat against the splintered rail and stepped through the gate that every man in the county swore led straight to a grave. Behind her, 100 voices rose at once, half laughing, half praying. "No one believes me," she whispered so quiet the dust seemed to lean in to hear it. "But he does." Across the corral, the black warhorse that had thrown 3 men and broken a 4th screamed and reared against the white-hot sky. And Clara, God help her, took another step toward him. "Before we go on, if stories of broken hearts and hard-won second chances move you the way they move me, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. This one earns its ending, I promise you. And do me a kindness. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see just how far Clara's story has traveled." The whole county had come to watch a woman die. That was the plain truth of it, though. Not a soul standing at the Rollins Corral that scorching July afternoon would have said it out loud. They told themselves they'd come for the horse trial for the lemonade the church ladies were ladling out warm for the chance to lean on a fence and gossip away a Saturday. But word had gone round since dawn, the way bad news always does, and the word was this: the charity girl, the one Ethan Rollins had taken in out of pity, had lost what little sense the good Lord gave her and meant to walk into Blackjack's pen. So they came, and they waited the way folks wait for a hanging. Clara Whitaker stood at the corral gate with her chin level and her hands hidden in the folds of her skirt, so no one could see them shake. She was 27 years old, lean as a fence rail from a year of going without, and she wore a faded dress that had been good cloth once before the fire, before the debt, before her whole life burned down to one trunk and a stack of her dead father's journals. Her boots were a man's boots cracked at the toe. Her hat was nobody's found in a barn. "Lord have mercy," said a woman behind her, fanning herself with a folded paper. "She really means to do it." "She'll be carried out on a board," said the man beside the woman, and he said it cheerful, like it was a fine thing to look forward to. Clara heard them. She heard all of them. She'd been hearing them for 3 months now, the whispers that followed her from the well to the barn to the supper table, and she had learned the only thing a body could do with talk like that was let it slide off her, like rain off a slicker. She kept her eyes on the horse. In the center of the pen, Blackjack turned. He was a big animal, 16 hands, and built like he'd been carved out of the same black rock as the mountains, and across his left shoulder ran a thick white scar, where someone sometime had laid open his hide and never let him forget it. He had been a soldier's horse once. He had carried a man into a storm and come home alone, and the man he'd carried had been Ethan Rollins's younger brother, and ever since that day, not a hand on the place would so much as carry a bucket past his fence. They'd tried to break him. 3 of them had tried, and Blackjack had put 2 of them in their beds for a week, and the third, a big Swede named Olson, had taken a hoof to the chest and never worked a ranch again. Now the horse pinned his ears and showed the whites of his eyes and screamed a high tearing sound that went through the crowd like a knife and set every dog in the yard to howling. "Get her out of there," somebody hollered, and that was when Ethan Rollins came through the crowd. He came the way a storm comes, shouldering men aside. His hat gone, his dark hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and his sun-browned face had gone the gray-white of a man who has already seen the worst thing happen once and cannot bear to see it again. He hit the rail hard enough to rattle it the length of the pen. "Clara." His voice cracked on it. "Clara, you back away from that gate. You hear me? You back away right now." She did not look at him. "Miss Whitaker." He was begging now, and Ethan Rollins did not beg not for any man or woman alive, and the whole county heard the break in him and went still. I am asking you nice. That is a warhorse. You can't control that warhorse. He has near killed grown men twice your weight." "I know what he's done," Clara said. "Then you know he'll do it to you." "I don't believe he will." A laugh went up from somewhere in the crowd, ugly and short. Clara felt it land between her shoulder blades. She did not turn around. Off to the side near the front, where the good folk always stood, Rebecca Harlan watched with her gloved hands folded neat at her waist and a small smile pressed flat against her mouth. She was the daughter of a cattle investor, a fine-boned girl in a fine green dress, And there'd been a time before the charity girl came when half the county figured she'd be the next Mrs. Rollins. She tilted her head now and spoke just loud enough to carry. "Let her go in," Rebecca said sweetly. "She's been telling everyone for weeks she has a way with animals. Let her show us. I, for one, would dearly love to see it." "Rebecca." Ethan didn't look at her. "Hold your tongue." "I'm only saying what everyone's thinking, Ethan." And maybe she was. Because nobody moved to stop it. 100 people stood at that fence, and not one of them stepped forward to drag Clara Whitaker back from the gate, because in their hearts, God forgive them, they wanted to see what would happen. They wanted the story. They wanted to go home to supper and say, "I was there. I saw it with my own eyes." That was the cruelty of it. The plain, everyday cruelty of decent people. And Clara had lived among it long enough to know it for exactly what it was. She put her hand on the gate latch. "Clara, please." Ethan had both hands on the rail now, white-knuckled, like the wood was the only thing holding him up. "Please, I have buried somebody I loved on account of that animal. I cannot—" His throat worked. "I cannot stand at this fence and watch it happen twice. Do you understand me? I will not survive it twice." For the first time, Clara turned her head and looked at him. And what passed between them then was a thing the crowd could not see and would not have understood if they had. Because Clara Whitaker was not looking at a cattle baron, the richest man in 3 counties, the cold and guarded master of Rollins Ranch. She was looking at a man as broken as the horse behind her. She was looking at grief wearing a clean shirt. And something in her face went gentle, just for a breath. "Ethan," she said, and she had never once called him by his Christian name. Not in 3 months, not at his own supper table, and the using of it now silenced him like a hand laid over his mouth. "I am not going to die today, and neither is he." Then she lifted the latch and stepped inside and pulled the gate shut behind her. The whole county drew one breath and held it. Blackjack swung to face her. He stood at the far rail, 12 feet of churned dust between them, and he was trembling all over, the way a horse trembles when it is deciding whether to run or to kill, and there was nothing in his rolling eye that looked like mercy. He struck the ground once with a forehoof. The crack of it echoed off the barn. Clara did not advance. She did not retreat. She stood just inside the gate with her hands loose at her sides and her shoulders dropped low and easy, and she did the one thing not a single man at that fence would have thought to do. She stopped looking at him. She turned her body a quarter away, soft-angled, and she let her gaze fall to the dirt between them, and she breathed out slow through her mouth so the whole front rank of the crowd could see her shoulders sink with it. She made herself small. She made herself no threat at all. She made herself in the language that runs older than any word a man ever spoke, a thing that meant the horse no harm. "Easy," she said, low, not a command, hardly even a word. "Easy now. I know. Blackjack's ears flicked. "What in the world is she doing?" a man muttered. "She's gone simple," another answered, standing there like she's waiting on a streetcar. But Ethan Rollins, watching from the rail with his heart slammed up into his throat, saw something the others did not. He saw the horse's ears come forward, not all the way, just a degree. Just enough that a man who had grown up around horses, who had loved them and bred them his whole life, felt the small hairs stand up along his arms in the murderous July heat. "Easy," Clara said again, and then soft as a secret, "It's only me." The horse blew out a long, shuddering breath and took a step toward her, not at her. Toward her, the difference between a charge and a question and a gasp ran the length of the fence like wind through wheat. Somewhere a child started to cry and was hushed. Rebecca Harlan's flat little smile faltered at one corner. "He's coming for her," a woman breathed. "Lord, he's coming for her, somebody." "No." Ethan said it without meaning to, half to himself, his eyes wide and fixed and full of a wild and impossible hope. "No, he ain't. Look at him. Look at his head. He's askin'." Clara reached up, slow, her palm turned down and empty, offering nothing, asking nothing, and she held it in the air at the height of the horse's nose, and she waited. She did not close the distance. She made him come the last of it. And the war horse that had broken 4 men and killed the master's brother stretched out his black neck across the dust and laid his nose soft as falling snow against the palm of Clara Whitaker's open hand. The crowd did not cheer. They could not. There was no breath left in any of them to cheer with. 100 people stood at that fence with their mouths open and their fans gone still, and watched a thing they had come to mock turn into a thing they would tell their grandchildren about, and the silence was so deep that they all of them heard it, heard the small broken sound the horse made low in his chest as her fingers found the white scar on his shoulder, a sound almost like grief, a sound almost like relief. "That's right," Clara whispered, and her own voice broke clean in two on it. "That's right. There you are." And then Ethan Rollins said the thing that changed everything. He had not meant to say it. It came up out of him without permission, dragged loose by the impossible sight of his dead brother's horse standing quiet under a woman's hand, and it came out hoarse and wondering and far too loud in the silence. He let her name him. The man beside him turned. "What's that, Mr. Rollins? Just now." Ethan's hand had come up to his own mouth. His eyes had not left Clara. "She called him only me, plain as day. It's only me." He swallowed. A horse don't gentle to a stranger's voice. Not like that, not in a breath. He turned slow and looked down the fence at the crowd, and his face had gone from gray to something Clara couldn't see from where she stood, something dawning and dreadful all at once. "She's done this before." The whisper went down the fence like fire in dry grass. "She's done this before. She's been in there before." How, when, who let her? And from the center of the pen, with her hand on the scar of a horse that no man could touch, Clara Whitaker finally turned and looked at Ethan Rollins across the trampled dust, and she did not deny it. "Before dawn," she said. Quiet, steady, the way a person tells a truth they're done hiding. "Every morning since the spring rains, before any of you woke, I'd come to his fence, and I'd sit, and I'd say nothing, and I'd wait. Some mornings he wouldn't come within 20 feet of me. Some mornings he screamed at me till the sun came up." Her hand moved on the horse's neck, gentle, ceaseless. "But I came back, every morning, because a thing that's been hurt the way he's been hurt doesn't need a man to break it, Ethan. It's been broken enough." Her eyes shone hard and wet in the brutal light. "It needs somebody to come back." Ethan Rollins stared at her like a man who has been struck, because he understood in that instant exactly what she was telling him and exactly what she was not. She was talking about the horse, and she was not talking about the horse at all. "3 months, he said. His voice had gone strange. 3 months, you let me believe, you let this whole county believe you were—" He couldn't finish it. "A fool," Clara supplied, almost gentle. "A charity girl too simple to know she'd get herself killed." She nodded once, and there was no anger in it, only a tiredness that went all the way down to the bone. "I let you believe it. Because the morning I told you the truth, the morning I told you that horse never killed your brother, that your grief just needed something living to lay the blame on you, dragged me out of that pen by my arm, and you forbid me from ever coming near him again." She lifted her chin. "So I stopped telling you. And I kept coming. And here we are." The blood went out of Ethan's face. He remembered it. God help him. He remembered it the morning weeks back when he'd found her inside Blackjack's pen, at first light. Her hand on the very scar she touched now, and the cold animal panic that had seized him had come out as fury, and he had taken her by the arm, hard enough to bruise, and hauled her out and stood over her in the dirt, shouting that she had no right. No right. "That horse killed Thomas. That horse is a killer. You stay away from him, or so help me." And she had looked up at him from the dirt, with her arm where his hand had been, and she had said soft as anything, "That horse did not kill your brother. Your grief just needed something to blame. He had not slept right since. You should have told me," he said now low. "I tried." Clara turned back to the horse. "You weren't ready to hear it. Same as he wasn't ready those first cold mornings to let me close." Her thumb moved over the white scar. Some hurts you can't go at straight on. They'll kill you if you try. You've got to come at them sideways and slow, and you've got to be willing to come back the next day and the day after that, even when nothing's changed, even when it screams at you, even when the whole county is laughing." She glanced at him sidelong, and her voice dropped so only he could catch it. "I'd have thought a man who lost what you lost would know that better than anybody." For a long moment, Ethan Rollins did not say anything at all. Then slowly he reached up and took off the hat he wasn't wearing, reached up out of pure old habit, the way a man does in church or at a graveside, and found his head bare and let the hand fall. And the crowd that had come to watch a woman die saw the richest, hardest, most closed-off man in 3 counties stand at that fence with his bare head bowed, and his eyes wet and shining undone in front of all of them by a charity girl and a killer horse. Rebecca Harlan saw it too. She saw the way Ethan Rollins looked at Clara. Whitaker saw it the way only a woman who'd wanted that look for herself could see it, and something behind her fine green dress and her flat-pressed smile went cold and quiet and dangerous. She had come to this corral to watch the charity girl be humbled. She had come for the pleasure of it. And instead she was standing in the dust watching the whole county fall a little in love with a stable girl in a dead man's boots, watching the man Rebecca had been promised to since girlhood. Look at that stable girl, like the sun came up out of her. And Rebecca Harlan was not a woman who lost gracefully. She turned without a word and walked back toward the carriages, and her hands hidden now in the folds of her own fine skirt were not folded sweet anymore. They were fists. In the pen, Clara Whitaker pressed her forehead for one moment against the warm black neck of the horse, and she shut her eyes. And the crowd was so quiet, she could hear the flies and the far-off lowing of the cattle, and her own heart slamming away in her chest. Now that it was over, now that it was safe, now that she could finally let her hands shake the way they'd been wanting to shake all afternoon. "I told you," she whispered into his mane so low not even the front rank could hear. And there were 2 people she was saying it to, the horse and a man 2 months dead, and maybe a third one, her own ruined father, who'd taught her every blessed thing she knew. "I told you somebody would come back." Black Jack stood for her steady as a church, and from the rail his voice rough, his hat still in his hand. Ethan Rollins finally found words. They came out quiet. They came out for her alone, though the whole county leaned in to catch them. "Miss Whitaker." A breath. "Clara." Another. "Where?" His voice failed him, and he tried again, and there was a whole grief and a whole apology and a whole beginning folded up inside the question. "Where in God's name did you learn to do that?" Clara lifted her head from the horse's neck. She looked at him across the dust, across 3 months of silence, and 1 bruised arm, and a county's worth of cruel laughter. And she looked at him a long, long moment before she answered. And when she did, her voice carried clear to the church ladies and the carriages, and every soul who had come that day to watch her die, and would now go home and tell it altogether different. "From my father," she said. "Before the fire took him, before the debt took everything else." Her hand settled flat on the warhorse's scarred black shoulder, and she stood up straight and tall in her dead man's boots in the center of the pen no man had dared to enter. And for the first time in 3 long months, Clara Whitaker did not look like a charity girl at all. "He trained the horses that men gave up on," she said. "And so do I." That night, after the crowd had gone home and the dust had settled and the lamps came up yellow in the windows of the big house, Ethan Rollins could not stop seeing it. The horse's nose in her open hand, the whole county holding its breath, and his own bare head bowed at the fence like a man at a grave. He found her in the barn. She was rubbing liniment into Black Jack's near foreleg, kneeling in the straw with her sleeves pushed up, and she did not stop when he came in, and she did not look up. "You ought to be in the house," Ethan said. "Resting, after today." He pulled something when he reared. Clara's hands kept moving slow and sure along the cannon bone. "Old injury. It pains him in the heat. That's half of why he's mean a thing that hurts and can't say so will bite the hand that comes near it." She glanced up at last. "You'd know about that." Ethan leaned against the post. He'd put his hat back on. He took it off again. "I bruised your arm," he said. You did. Weeks back. When I found you in his pen. His jaw worked. I never apologized for it. No, you didn't. He waited for her to make it easy on him, the way folks did, the way everybody had been making things easy on Ethan Rollins his whole moneyed life. She didn't. She just looked at him and waited, and the silence stretched out until he had to fill it himself. I'm sorry, Clara. I had no right to lay a hand on you. I was... He stopped, started over harder, the truth costing him. I was scared, and a scared man's a mean one. You said as much today about the horse. Reckon it's true about men too. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she set down the liniment rag and rose, and she stood facing him in the lamplight, with straw on her knees and her father's old work in her hands, and something in her face softened by 1/2 degree. Apology's a good start, she said. But a man who's truly sorry does more than say so. Tell me what more. Open the gate yourself someday. Her voice was quiet. Walk into him on your own 2 feet. Not for me, not for the county, for your brother. She picked up the lamp. When you can do that, Ethan, I'll believe you're sorry. Till then, it's just words, and I've heard a great many words. She walked past him out of the barn, and Ethan Rollins stood alone in the dark, with a horse he was afraid of, and a truth he wasn't ready for, and that was the first night in 2 months he didn't dream of the storm. But not everyone in that house had bowed their head at the fence. May Rollins had watched the whole thing from the shade of the porch, and what she'd seen had not warmed her 1 degree. She caught Clara at the kitchen door before the girl could climb the back stairs to her little room above the tack shed. Come here, May said. Clara came. She'd learned that much when May Rollins said, come here you came, because the alternative was a week of cold that would freeze the marrow out of you. You made a spectacle of my son today. May sat very straight at the head of her own kitchen table, a proud woman gone gray and hard, her hands folded on the oilcloth. In front of the whole county, you put him on his knees at a fence rail like a hired hand. You know what they're saying tonight in every parlor from here to the river? That the charity girl gentled the killer horse. That my son is bewitched. May's mouth was a thin line. By a penniless drifter wearing a dead man's boots. That the Rollins name is going to ruin in the dirt of a corral. Don't you smile at me, girl. I'm not smiling, ma'am. Your father trained horses. Fine. We're grateful, the family's grateful he saved our breeding line 40 years back, and we paid that debt by taking you in when you had nowhere to fall. May leaned forward. But that debt is paid. You understand me. You owe this family your decency and your distance. You do not owe it your designs on my son. Clara stood very still. I have no designs, Mrs. Rollins. Every penniless girl has designs. My father, Clara said slowly, used to say the same thing about horses, that a horse that won't be ridden has got designs. A horse that bites has got a wicked nature. She set her jaw. He was wrong every single time. There was always a reason, always a hurt underneath that somebody'd rather call wickedness than go to the trouble of understanding. She met the old woman's eyes. Good night, ma'am. I'll see to Black Jack's leg in the morning. She climbed the stairs with her back straight, and May Rollins sat alone in her kitchen a long time after. And the thing that troubled the old woman most was not that the girl had been impudent. It was that the girl had been right. Word traveled fast in cattle country, and by the next morning it had reached the Harlan place, where Rebecca sat at her own breakfast table refusing to eat. Her father, a heavy, florid man named Cyrus Harlan, who'd built a fortune lending against other men's herds, watched his daughter push eggs around her plate, and finally set down his coffee. You're sulking, he said. I dislike sulking. It puts lines in a young woman's face, and lines cost money to court past. I'm not sulking, father. You are. Because some pauper out at Rollins did a parlor trick with a horse and your young man clapped for her. Cyrus buttered his bread. Forget it. Rollins owes the bank near $9,000 against last winter's losses. Half that paper's mine. He smiled around a mouthful. A man that deep in a hole marries where the money is. He'll come to his senses by autumn. They always do when the note comes due. Rebecca lifted her head slowly. $9,000, she said. Don't trouble your mind with figures. How much of it is yours? Cyrus paused. He looked at his daughter, really looked the way a man looks at a tool he hadn't realized was sharp, and something almost like respect crossed his red face. 4,000 give or take, he said. Why? Rebecca set down her fork. She folded her gloved hands on the white cloth, neat and sweet, and she smiled at her father, and it was the same flat-pressed smile she'd worn at the corral. No reason, she said. Only it would be a shame, wouldn't it, if anything happened to make Ethan Rollins look like a fool, in front of the whole county, the way he very nearly looked yesterday before that girl saved him. Cyrus Harlan studied her a moment longer. Then he laughed and went back to his bread, and he never once thought to ask what his daughter meant by it. And that was the second great mistake the Harlans made, though the first, taking Rebecca for a fool, was older and ran deeper. Out at Rollins, the days turned hot and long, and a strange thing began to happen. The hands started watching Clara. Not the way they'd watched her before, sidelong sneering the way men watch a woman they've decided is beneath them. This was different. This was the way men watch somebody who knows a thing they don't. When the bay gelding came up lame, and the farrier couldn't find the cause, it was Clara who knelt in the dust and pressed her thumb along the frog of the hoof and found the gravel buried deep where it had festered. When a green colt no one could load balked at the chute, and 3 grown men cussed and hauled and got nowhere, it was Clara who took the lead rope, turned her back on the animal, and walked away, and the colt, suddenly free of all that pulling, trotted up the ramp after her like a pup. "Well, I'll be damned," said the foreman, an old hand named Pruitt with a gray mustache and 40 years of saddle leather in his hide. He took his hat off when he said it. "Beg pardon, ma'am." "You're forgiven, Mr. Pruitt." Clara unclipped the lead. "He's not stubborn. He's frightened of the dark in the chute. Hang a lantern in it and he'll load every time." Pruitt did. The colt loaded every time. And by the end of that week, there wasn't a man on the place who'd have let Clara Whitaker carry her own water bucket. And that was a humbling thing for a county that had come to watch her die not 7 days before. But the one who'd believed first stayed the truest. Lily Rollins was 19. Ethan's younger sister, all warmth, where her mother was all winter, and she had loved Clara from the first, because Clara was the only soul on that ranch who'd answer her questions, instead of patting her on the head. They sat together in the evenings mending tack, and Lily asked her things about the horses, about the wide world, about the fire and the debt and the father Clara never spoke of. "What was he like?" Lily asked one night. "Your pa?" Clara's needle stilled. "He had hands like God made him out of leather," she said after a moment. "And the gentlest voice you ever heard. Horses other men had given up on for killers, truly given up ready to put a bullet in, he'd take them. And 3 months later, you'd see a child riding them down the lane." She drew the thread through slow. "He used to say there's no such thing as a bad horse, only a frightened one or a hurting one, or a horse that learned that men are not to be trusted and learned it for good reason. What happened to him?" The needle stopped again. Longer this time. "Drought," Clara said. 3 years of it. Then debt when the drought killed the work. Then—" Her voice went flat and careful, the voice of a wound walled up. "Then a fire. The barn went up in the night. 40 head of horses inside." She looked at the tack in her hands and not at Lily. "He went in after them. He got out 11. He went back for the 12th. She stopped. "He didn't come out the 3rd time. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. "Clara, it's an old grief." Clara's voice didn't shake, which was somehow worse. "But I'll tell you what I learned from it, and you can carry it the rest of your days. When a thing is on fire, Lily, a barn, a horse, a person, you do not stand at the fence and shout at it to calm down. It does not hear you. It cannot. You go in." She finally lifted her eyes, and they were wet and steady. "You go in slow, and you go in low, and you make yourself small, and you give it a way out it can trust. That's the only thing that's ever worked. On horses or on grief or on men." A breath. "My father knew that. It's why he went back the third time. He couldn't leave the last one in the fire. Lily was crying now, soft the way the young cry for griefs that aren't their own. And the 11 he saved, sold them all to pay the debt. Clara almost smiled. All but one trunk of his journals and a girl with nowhere to go. She reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. And that girl ended up here. So you see, it's not all sorrow. Neither of them heard Ethan in the doorway. He'd come to say goodnight to his sister. He'd been standing there since he went back for the 12th, and he could not make himself move, and he could not make himself leave. And when Clara said, "You do not stand at the fence," and shout at it to calm down, it does not hear you. When she said that, something in Ethan Rollins's chest cracked clean down the middle like spring ice, because that was exactly, precisely, word for word, what he had done. At the fence. Yesterday. And 2 months ago at a different fence when the storm came, and he'd stood on the porch and shouted at his fool brother to get that horse in the barn. "Get him in now!" And Thomas had laughed and waved and ridden out into the dark to fetch the last of the cattle. He went back for the 12th. Ethan turned and walked out into the night before either woman saw his face, and he stood in the yard under the hot summer stars, with his hands shaking, and for the first time in 2 months, he let himself say the thing he had never once said out loud. "It wasn't the horse," he whispered to the dark. It was never the horse. He didn't sleep that night either. The next morning he came to the barn before dawn, before even Clara. He thought, though, he was wrong, and he stood outside Black Jack's stall with his hand on the latch, and he could not lift it. He stood there a long time. His hand sweated on the cold iron, and the horse inside, sensing him, swung his great black head around and laid back his ears and showed the white scar in the gray light. And Ethan Rollins flinched back from the gate like he'd been burned and stood breathing hard in the aisle, ashamed. "It takes time." He spun. Clara was there, a shawl over her nightdress, a lantern in her hand. She'd come early the way she came every morning. "You weren't ready," she said gently. "There's no shame in it. You think I walked into his pen the first morning I sat at his fence for 3 weeks before he'd come within a body's length of me? 3 weeks of nothing but sitting and talking to a horse that screamed at me." She came and stood beside him, and she set the lantern down, and she did not touch the latch either. "But you came down here in the dark, Ethan, on your own. You put your hand on the gate." She looked up at him. "A week ago you couldn't have walked into this barn. That's not nothing. That's the first dawn. Tomorrow you'll come back and it'll be a little easier, and the day after that easier still. And if I never can, then you never can." She said it without judgment. "But I don't think that's true. I've watched you a long time now, Ethan Rollins. You're not a coward. You're a man who got hurt so bad he built a wall, and now he's standing on his own side of it, wondering how to get back over." She picked up the lantern. "I can't carry you over, nobody can, but I'll stand here with you every dawn till you climb it yourself, if that's what it takes." He looked at her in the lantern light, this penniless girl in a dead man's boots who'd faced down the whole county, and a killer horse, and his own mother's ice, and Ethan Rollins felt something he had sworn after the storm he would never feel again, because feeling it meant you had something left to lose. He felt hope. "Why?" he asked, rough. "Why would you do that? Stand with me after how I treated you, after my mother, after this whole county laughed in your face." He shook his head. "You don't owe this family a thing. May says the debt's paid. So why?" Clara was quiet a moment. "Because somebody stood with me once," she said, "after the fire, when I had nothing and nobody, and I'd have laid down in the road and let the dark take me." She looked at the horse, not at Ethan. "An old man I'd never met. Trained mules down near the border. He found me half-starved at a way station, and he didn't say a wise word or fix a single thing. He just sat with me. Days. Weeks. Till I could stand." Her voice was very soft. "He died that winter. I never got to pay him back. So I reckon I'm paying it forward instead to a man and a horse who both need somebody to come back." She turned for the door. "It's how the world's supposed to work, Ethan. Somebody catches you when you fall, and then you spend the rest of your life catching." She left him there in the gray dawn, and Ethan Rollins put his hand back on the latch. And this time, he lifted it. He didn't go in. His nerve broke at the threshold, and he stood frozen with the stall door open and the horse glaring, and after a long, terrible minute, he eased it shut again and walked out shaking. But he'd lifted the latch. He'd opened the door. And as he crossed the yard in the rising sun, he found he was almost laughing, ragged and amazed, because the horse hadn't lunged. The horse had only watched. The horse, it seemed, was willing to wait on him, too. He didn't know that 30 feet away, in the long shadow of the bunkhouse, a man was watching him with very different eyes. The man's name was Del Crane, and he was the kind of hand that drifts through cattle country, leaving small debts and large grudges, and he'd been let go from 2 outfits already for drink, and for stealing, and for a knife he'd pulled in a card game down in Abilene. Pruitt had warned Ethan against hiring him. But it had been a hard season, and hands were short, and Ethan had a soft spot for men nobody else would take. And so Del Crane had a bunk at Rollins Ranch, and a grievance the size of a barn because he'd been passed over for the foreman's pay he figured he was owed, and he drank on it nightly. And 3 days later, in the back of the dry goods store in town, Rebecca Harlan found him. She did not introduce herself as a Harlan. She introduced herself as a friend who'd heard he was a man who could use some money and wasn't fussy about how he came by it. And Del Crane looked at the fine green dress and the soft gloved hands and the cold flat smile, and he reckoned correctly that here was the most dangerous person he'd met in a long career of dangerous company. "What's the work?" he said. "Nothing much." Rebecca kept her voice light. "The summer trial's in 2 weeks. The whole county comes. Now I want a thing to happen at that trial, a small thing, an embarrassment. I want that horse, the black one, to throw the girl in front of everybody. I want her humbled, that's all." She turned a coin between her fingers, and his eyes followed it like a dog's. "You're a hand at Rollins. You've access to the tack. A saddle strap that's been worked thin just enough it gives way under a hard buck. The girl goes off in the dirt, the whole county laughs, and she's nothing again. Back to nothing. And nobody's the wiser because old leather phrase." She set the coin on the counter. There were more behind it. "I'm told you've no love for that ranch." Del Crane looked at the money. "She could get hurt," he said, not because he cared, because he was pricing it. "She's a horsewoman, isn't she?" Rebecca's smile never moved. "They fall off horses all the time. It's practically a hobby of theirs." She pushed the coins an inch toward him. "Half now, half after." And Del Crane, who would come to wish to his dying day that he'd thrown the money in her face, picked it up instead and put it in his pocket. "All right," he said. "A frayed strap, a girl in the dirt, nothing worse." "Nothing worse," Rebecca agreed. She lied, of course. Not because she meant murder, even Rebecca in her cold heart only meant humiliation. But she'd never in her life touched a thing that ran on its own blood and breath. She thought a horse was like a wagon. You damaged the part, and the part failed, and the failure stopped right there, neat and contained. She did not understand because she had never bothered to learn that a frightened animal does not break neatly, that 1,000 pounds of panic does not stop where you tell it to, that she was not buying an embarrassment at all. She was buying a runaway. She just didn't know it yet, and neither did Del Crane. And neither did the girl who'd spend the next 2 weeks gentling the very horse that was meant to break her. Rising every dawn, sitting at the fence talking low, while above in the big house, Ethan Rollins lifted a latch each morning and got a half a step closer to a gate he could not yet walk through. And his mother watched it all with cold eyes that were against her will beginning to thaw, because May Rollins had seen a thing she couldn't unsee. She'd come down to the kitchen one black hour before dawn, sleepless, with the old griefs that visit old women in the dark, and she'd looked out the window and seen 2 figures at Blackjack's fence. Her son. And the girl. Not touching. Not even talking by the look. Just sitting side by side on the top rail in the dark. 2 people who'd each lost the floor out from under their lives, keeping watch together over a horse that the whole world had given up on. And May had pressed her old hand flat against the cold glass and remembered being young and being in love and being kept apart from it by people who thought they knew better, and she'd taken her hand away and gone back up to bed without a word. The next morning, she set 3 places for breakfast. She'd been setting 2 for 3 months, the family, and a tray sent out to the tack shed. 3 months of cold. And when Clara came in from the barn at sunup, hands still smelling of liniment, there was a place laid for her at May Rollins's own table. The good china, the chair pulled out, and the old woman standing stiff and proud at the stove with her back turned so nobody could see her face. "Well," May said to the eggs, "don't stand in the doorway letting the heat out. Sit. Eat. A woman can't gentle horses on an empty stomach." Clara stood very still in the doorway. Ethan at the table went motionless with his coffee halfway to his mouth. And Lily made a small sound and pressed her napkin to her face, and then she was up out of her chair and across the kitchen with her arms around Clara's neck. And Clara stood there in the doorway, with the girl hanging off her and May's stiff back at the stove, and Ethan's wide eyes over his coffee. And the thing that had been frozen in that house for 2 long months began at last to break up and flow. "Thank you, ma'am," Clara managed. "Don't thank me. Sit." May brought the pan to the table without turning her face, and her voice was gruff, and her hands were not quite steady. "And you'll call me May. I'm tired of ma'am. It makes me feel 100 years old." She set down the eggs. "Lily, let go of the girl so she can eat. Ethan, close your mouth, you'll catch flies." They ate breakfast together, the 4 of them. The first family breakfast at Rollins Ranch since the storm took Thomas. And outside the window, the sun came up hot and gold over a corral where a black horse with a white scar dozed in the early light, gentled at last, and none of them. Not the thawing mother, not the half-healed son, not the warm-hearted girl, not the woman who'd taught a killer horse to bow its head. None of them knew that 2 miles away, a man with money in his pocket was sharpening a thin blade against a thin strap of leather, and that everything they'd just begun to rebuild was already counting down to the morning of the trial, when it would all come apart at once. The 2 weeks went by like water through a man's fingers, and on the morning of the trial, the whole county came again. They came different this time. 2 weeks ago, they'd come to watch a charity girl die. Now they came to watch her work, and there's a world of difference between the two, and Clara felt it the moment the first wagons rolled up the lane. Hats lifted as she crossed the yard. The church ladies who'd whispered behind their gloves now nodded and called her Miss Whitaker with respect in it. A rancher she'd never met touched his brim and said he'd heard she had a gift, and might she look at his mare come fall, the one that wouldn't take a bit. Clara said she'd be glad to. She did not let any of it touch the cold, clear place inside her where the work lived. Her father had taught her that too. The day the crowd loves you is the day you watch your footing closest girl. Pride's killed more good hands than any horse ever did. Ethan found her at Black Jack's stall an hour before the trial, checking the tack the way she checked it every single time, running the leather through her hands. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Today, in front of all of them. We could call it off, say he's lame. Nobody'd think less of you. I'd think less of me." Clara kept her hands moving on the strap. "And so would he." She nodded at the horse. "He's ready, Ethan. He's been ready a week. If I keep him penned now, hiding it, tells him the world's still a thing to be afraid of. It's not. Not anymore. Today he walks out in front of the whole county with his head up, and he shows them what he is." Her voice softened. What he always was under the scar. Ethan watched her hands. "And after, when the trial's done." "After," Clara said, and for just a second her clear, cold work voice warmed clean through. "I expect there'll be a great deal of pie. Lily's been baking since 4. The whole house smells of cinnamon." She glanced up at him with the ghost of a smile. "You could try walking him out yourself, you know. After. When the crowd's gone and it's just us. He'd let you now, I think." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at the horse, and the horse looked back at him. Ears soft. No scream in him this morning, and Ethan Rollins wanted to say yes more than he'd wanted to say anything in 2 long months. "Maybe," he said, "after." It was the closest he'd come. Clara let it be enough. What neither of them knew was that the tack she held in her hands that morning was not the tack that horse would wear. Because Del Crane had done his work in the dark. He'd waited till the bunkhouse slept, And he'd taken the good saddle, the one Clara had checked and checked again, and he'd switched it for another off the wall, an older rig, near identical to the eye. And on that older rig, he'd worked the cinch strap thin from the inside, where no hand running over the outside would feel it. He'd shaved it down with that thin Abilene blade till it was holding by a third of its leather, and no more a strap that would carry a horse standing quiet all the morning long, and let go the instant that horse threw its weight hard against it. Then he'd hung it where the good one belonged, and he'd gone back to his bunk, and he'd lain awake a long time with Rebecca Harlan's coins cold in his pocket, telling himself it was only an embarrassment. Only a girl in the dirt, only old leather giving way the way old leather does. He'd been telling himself that for 2 weeks. He was a man with money in his pocket, and a stone in his gut, and the closer the trial came, the heavier the stone got, and the more he drank to keep from feeling it. He was drinking now in the gray before dawn, when the thing went wrong the first time, because Clara, being Clara, came to the tack room before anyone, and she took down the saddle to dress the horse herself, and she ran the cinch strap through her hands, the way she ran every strap through her hands, and she stopped. She stopped cold. Her thumb had found a place on the underside of the leather where the grain felt wrong. Thinner. Wronger. She turned the strap to the lantern light and looked close, and what she saw made the cold, clear place inside her go colder still, because that was no honest fraying. Honest fraying was ragged random, the work of years. This was clean. This was even. This had been done with a blade by a steady hand, and then rubbed with dirt to age the look of it. And Clara Whitaker had grown up around tack, and around men who'd cheat at anything, and she knew sabotage when her thumb found it. Somebody had cut the strap. She stood very still in the tack room with her heart going hard, and the first thing she felt, God help her, was not fear. It was a cold, flat fury. Because she knew what this was. She knew exactly what this was. Somebody wanted that horse to throw her in front of the whole county. Somebody wanted her broken back down to nothing. She thought of Rebecca Harlan's flat-pressed smile. She did not have a shred of proof. But she did not need proof to know. And then, the second thought came hard on the heels of the first. And it changed everything, because Clara Whitaker was not a woman who broke a strap and ran to a man to fix it for her. If she went to Ethan with this, the trial would stop. The county would be sent home, and nothing would be proven, nobody named, and whoever had done this would simply wait and do it again on some other day, with no clever girl checking the leather first. Worse, Blackjack would be penned again, hidden again, taught again that the world was a thing that meant him harm. 2 weeks of dawn work undone in an afternoon. No, she would change the strap herself, quietly. She'd take the good one, the one she'd dressed him in every morning, the sound one, and she'd swap them back and tell no one, and she'd walk that horse out in front of the whole county and let him shine. And then after, when the trial was won, and the horse was a hero and not a victim, she'd take the cut strap straight to Ethan and let him see for himself the clean, even work of a blade. It was the wrong choice. It was a brave, proud, foolish choice, and it came within a hair of costing a child his life, and Clara would carry the weight of it to her grave. But she made it in the gray before dawn with cold fury in her chest, and the best of intentions, and she took down the good strap and swapped it for the cut one, and she hid the cut one in the bottom of her trunk under her father's journals, and she told no living soul. She thought she'd fixed it. She'd only moved it. Because Del Crane, 3 hours later, sick with drink and sicker with dread, came to the tack room himself to look one last time at what he'd done, to maybe, just maybe, undo it, because the stone in his gut had grown all night into a boulder. And he found the good strap on the saddle, the sound one. And he thought the girl had found his work and replaced it clean. And his first feeling was a wash of pure relief so strong it near buckled his knees, because it meant the thing was off, the thing was done. No embarrassment. No girl in the dirt. His hands were clean. And then Rebecca Harlan's man came to the fence. She'd sent a rider, a quiet, hard fellow, who did the Harlan family's quiet, hard work. And the rider found Del Crane behind the tack room, and said low that Miss Harlan had heard the girl checked her tack. Mighty careful. And Miss Harlan would not be paying the second half of any money for a job that didn't get done. And was the strap cut, or was it not? It's off. Del hissed. She found it. Switched it back. It's done. "It's over. Tell your lady to keep her money." "My lady don't take over for an answer," the rider said. "Cut it again. Now, before the trial. Or give back the first half and explain to her yourself why you're a thief who don't deliver." He leaned in. "You know what happens to men who take Harlan money and don't deliver. Del Crane knew. And that was the moment, the single hinge on which the whole bloody day turned, when a weak, frightened, greedy man made the worst choice of his life. Because he believed Rebecca Harlan's money less dangerous to refuse than to keep, and because the drink had hollowed out his judgment, and because he told himself the same lie one final time, only an embarrassment, only a girl in the dirt, nothing worse. He waited till the tack room emptied, and he took that thin Abilene blade and he cut the good strap, the sound one, the one Clara had so carefully restored, cut it worse than the first, deeper, thinner in his shaking hurry, leaving barely a quarter of the leather holding. Then he threw up behind the barn and went and found the deepest bottle he owned. So when Clara came to dress the horse for the trial, she ran her hands over the strap. She'd already fixed the one she trusted, the one she'd checked an hour before, and she did not check it again. Why would she? She'd swapped it herself. She knew it was sound. She'd staked her certainty on it. And that certainty, that one human reasonable certainty, was the gap the devil walked through. She saddled Blackjack with a cut strap and never knew. The trial began near noon, under a sun that hammered the corral white. The county packed the rails 3 deep. May Rollins sat in the place of honor with her chin high. Lily perched on the top rail with flowers still on her sleeves, too excited to sit proper. And out among the carriages in her fine green dress, Rebecca Harlan watched with her gloved hands folded and her flat smile in place, certain that within the hour, the charity girl would be eating dirt in front of everyone she'd charmed. Clara led Blackjack into the center of the pen, and the crowd went quiet. And then a murmur ran through them, soft and wondering, because the killer horse walked at the end of her rope like a lamb. Head low, ears soft. The white scar plain in the sun, but the menace gone clean out of him. She walked him in a circle, and he followed her hand. She backed him, and he backed. She raised her arm, and he stopped and stood. And the county that had watched this horse break 4 men sat in their Sunday clothes and forgot to breathe. "My lord," somebody whispered. "She's done it. She's truly done it." Ethan stood at the gate where he'd stood 2 weeks before, and his chest was so full he could hardly stand it. Pride, and something deeper than pride. Watching this woman, he. And then Clara set her boot in the stirrup to mount. It was the first hard pull on the cinch. The strap held, just. It held through the mount, held as she swung up light and easy, and settled into the saddle, held, as Blackjack stood quiet beneath her, and the crowd let out its breath in a great glad rush, and began finally to cheer. It held for everything but a panic. And the panic came from the smallest, sweetest, most ordinary thing in the world. Because down at the far rail, Lily's young cousin, a boy of 6 named Samuel, in a starched collar he'd been fighting all morning, had brought a puppy. A fat, brown ranch pup he loved more than his Sunday clothes. And in the great glad noise of the cheering, the pup squirmed loose of his arms and shot under the rail and out into the corral, yapping delighted, a small brown blur streaking straight across the open ground toward the horse and the woman in the center. And the boy, 6 years old, and loving that pup with his whole heart, did the thing that 6-year-old boys do. He went after it. He was under the rail and into the pen before a single grown hand could grab his collar, running on his short legs across the dust, calling the pup's name in his high child's voice, running directly into the path of a half-broke warhorse that had killed before. The crowd's cheer turned to a scream. Blackjack's head came up. The pup darting, the child running, the wall of sudden human screaming. It hit the horse all at once. Every old terror, every reason he'd ever learned to believe the world meant murder, and the gentled animal of 2 weeks vanished in a heartbeat, and the warhorse came roaring back. He reared, straight up, screaming, 1,600 pounds of panic clawing at the white sky. Clara thrown forward against his neck, fighting for the reins, and he came down and he threw his weight and the cut strap let go. It snapped with a sound like a pistol shot. The saddle slewed sideways. Clara, mid-fight for control, was flung half off, hanging by one stirrup, and a fist of mane along the horse's heaving shoulder, and Blackjack's saddle twisted under his belly, leather flapping at his legs like a live thing biting him, lost the last of his mind entirely. He bolted. He spun and bucked and bolted blind with terror, and the child Samuel was directly in front of him. Frozen now, the pup forgotten, staring up at the mountain of screaming horse coming down on him. Time broke into pieces. Ethan was over the gate. He didn't remember going over it. He was simply over it and running, and his mouth was open, and out of it came the same words he'd screamed 2 weeks ago, the same words he'd screamed at his brother in the storm, ripped up out of the deepest terror of his life. "You can't control that war horse." But this time, he wasn't shouting them at a fool taking a foolish risk. This time, he was shouting them at the only person fast enough to save the boy. And Clara heard him. Hanging half off a bolting horse by one stirrup, her ribs slammed against a heaving shoulder, the ground tearing past inches below her face, she heard Ethan Rollins scream that she couldn't control this horse. And in the white-hot center of that catastrophe, Clara Whitaker made the second great choice of the day, and this one she made right. She let go of trying to control him. Her father's voice clear as a bell through 40 years, and a barn fire. "You do not master a panicked thing, girl. You cannot. You join it. You get down into the fear with it, and you become the one thing in all that terror it can trust." She stopped fighting the horse. With a wrench that tore her shoulder, she hauled herself up off the stirrup and onto his neck, lay flat along it, got her mouth down by his ear, and instead of pulling, instead of hauling, instead of fighting him for the reins, she did the impossible thing, the only thing, the thing no other soul at that fence would have known to do. She made herself small against him, and she began to talk. "It's only me." Low, steady, into the flat of his ear as the world tore past. "It's only me. It's only me. I'm here. I came back. I always come back." Her hand left the rein entirely and went flat to the white scar on his shoulder. The place he knew, the place that meant safety, the only safe place in the screaming world. "Easy, easy. I know. I know. I know what they took from you." The boy was 10 feet away, frozen, the horse a runaway mountain bearing down. "I know what fear feels like. I have felt it. I am feeling it now, but you are not alone in it." 8 feet. Blackjack's stride broke. A hitch in the gallop. The ear under her mouth flicked back. "Come back to me. Come back. It's only me. It's only me." 6 feet. The boy's mother screaming somewhere behind the rail. Ethan running, and too far, he'd never reach the child in time, no one would. There was only the woman and the horse and the 6-year-old frozen in the dirt. 4 feet. And Clara Whitaker lying flat along the neck of a killer horse at a dead run, did the last thing threw her whole weight and her whole soul into one word, the horse's word. The word that had gentled him in the gray dawns, spoken not as a command, but as a hand reaching down into a fire. Whoa! Blackjack planted his 4 feet. He came out of the gallop so hard that the dust exploded up around him in a wall. His haunches dropping nearly to the ground, his great body folding down out of the run, and he slid hooves, locked plowing furrows in the dirt, and he stopped. He stopped with his lowered head, his soft muzzle 18 inches from the face of the boy. The whole world went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The dust hung in the air and slowly began to settle, and in the terrible ringing quiet, there was only the heaving of the horse's sides, and the small hitching breath of the child, and the sound, very soft, of a woman weeping into a black mane. Then Clara slid down. She came off the horse on shaking legs, and she did not let go of him. Kept one hand flat on the scar. The whole way down kept talking. Kept the contact, kept herself, the one steady thing, and she stepped between Blackjack and the boy. Slow her body, a wall, and she reached back with her free hand and found the child's starched collar and drew him gently in behind her skirts out of the path safe. "It's all right," she said, and her voice broke clean in half on it. "It's all right now. You're safe. He's safe." She wasn't sure herself which one she was talking to. "Everybody's safe." The horse lowered his head the rest of the way and pressed his nose against her chest, trembling all over, and Clara wrapped her arm around his great scarred neck and held him, the runaway and the child and the woman, all three shaking together, in the center of the pen. And that was when the county broke. They did not cheer. Not yet. It came up slower than that came up first as a single sob from a woman at the rail. Then another. Then a sound that ran through the whole crowd like wind. The sound of 100 people who had just watched a child not die. And then somebody started clapping. And then they all were. And then they were on their feet and roaring. And it was not the easy cheer of 2 weeks before. This was bigger. This came up out of the gut. This was the sound of an entire county that had come to be entertained and had instead been to church. But Clara wasn't listening to them. Clara had gone very still holding the horse because something at the back of her mind had finally caught up with the front of it. The strap. She'd fixed the strap. She'd checked it an hour ago, the good strap, the sound one. And it had snapped anyway. Clean through. Snapped like a pistol shot. She turned her head and looked down at the broken cinch hanging from the slewed saddle, and even from here, even with her arms full of trembling horse, she could see the cut end of it. Even. Clean. A blade's work. Cut again. Somebody had cut it again, after she'd fixed it. Which meant somebody had been in that tack room after her this very morning with a knife. Ethan reached them. He came skidding into the dust on his knees beside the child, hauling Samuel up against his chest, running his hands over the boy to feel for hurt, and finding none. And then he was looking up at Clara, with his whole heart in his ruined face, 2 weeks and 2 months, and his whole closed life breaking open at once. He couldn't get it out. He stopped. You stopped him. You got between him and the boy. You put yourself, Clara, you could have... His voice shattered. You saved Samuel's life. You saved... He stopped. His eyes had gone to the broken strap, to the clean-cut end of it. His face changed. Clara. Very low now. Very different. The horseman in him seeing what the terrified man had missed. That's a cut. That ain't a break. That strap's been... He picked up the dangling end, and he looked at it, and the blood drained out of his sun-browned face till he was gray as ash. That's a knife. Somebody took a knife to my tack. He looked up, and his eyes were no longer soft. They had gone flat and hard and dangerous as Clara had never seen them. Somebody cut this strap to throw you, in front of the whole county, and a 6-year-old child near died of it. I know, Clara said quietly. You know, I found the first cut at dawn. She held his eyes. She would not lie to him, not now, not after this. Somebody worked it thin in the night. I found it when I dressed the horse this morning. And I... Her voice didn't waver, but the cost of it showed in her face. I swapped it for a sound strap and told no one. Because I thought if I raised the alarm, the trial would stop and the horse would be penned again and nothing would be proven, and they'd just do it again some other day. I thought I'd fixed it. She looked at the broken end in his hand. I didn't know they'd come back and cut it twice. I didn't know they'd... Her breath caught for the first time. Ethan. That boy. If Blackjack hadn't stopped, if 2 weeks of dawns hadn't taught him to trust my voice over his own terror, that child would be dead in this dirt right now. And it would be my fault, because I chose pride over raising the alarm. I will carry that. I will carry it forever. Ethan stared at her. And the county pressing in now at the rails went quiet again to listen, because the cheering had died, and word was running mouth to mouth that the strap had been cut, that this was no accident, that somebody among them had done a murder's work and very nearly got a child killed for it. Ethan rose slowly to his feet with the cut strap in his fist. He set Samuel down gentle and pointed him toward his weeping mother. And then he turned, and he looked out at the crowd, at the carriages, at the fine folk, and the church ladies, and the hands, and the whole watching county. And Ethan Rollins's voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried to the last row. Because there is a kind of quiet a furious man gets. That's worse than any shout. Somebody here, he said, took a knife to my tack last night, twice, cut a cinch strap so it'd let go under a hard buck and throw the rider in the dirt for sport. He held the leather up over his head so they could all see the clean-cut end of it catch the sun. They meant to humble a woman. What they near did was kill a child. He turned slow, scanning every face. I aim to find out who, and I will find out who. And when I do... His jaw worked. There ain't a court or a county or a cattle baron in this territory going to stand between me and that man. The silence stretched out long and terrible, and out among the carriages in her fine green dress, Rebecca Harlan stood frozen with her gloved hands, no longer folded sweet, but gripping each other, white-knuckled at her waist, her flat smile gone, her face the color of milk, because she had come to watch a girl eat dirt, and she had instead watched that girl save a child's life, and she had heard the man she'd been promised to since girlhood swear before the whole county that he would find the one who'd done it. And 30 feet from her, behind the barn, a weak, frightened, greedy man, with a thin Abilene blade still in his pocket, and Harlan money still cold against his hip, slid down the wall into the dirt and put his face in his shaking hands. Because Del Crane had just watched a 6-year-old boy nearly die of his cowardice, and he knew the way, you know your own name, that he could not live with this one. The question was only whether he'd die with it or tell. He told. It took Del Crane the rest of that afternoon and most of a bottle to do it, but in the end, the boulder in his gut was bigger than his fear of the Harlans, and as the carriages were hitching to leave and the county was buzzing like a kicked hive, he came staggering out from behind the barn into the yard where Ethan Rollins stood with the cut strap still in his fist. "Mr. Rollins." Ethan turned. "It was me." Del Crane's voice cracked. He was gray and sweating and stinking of whiskey, and his hands shook so bad he had to fist them to keep them still. "The strap, both times. I cut it. I'm the one." The yard went dead silent. The folks still hitching their wagons froze where they stood. Pruitt, the old foreman, took a step forward with murder coming up in his face, and Ethan put out a hand to stop him without ever taking his eyes off Del Crane. "You," Ethan said. Very quiet. "Me." Del's eyes were streaming now, drink and shame and terror all at once. "But it weren't my idea, Mr. Rollins. I swear before God it weren't. I needed the money. I'm a weak man, I know it, but I never wanted to hurt nobody. I was told it was just to throw her, just to embarrass the girl, just to fall in the dirt, nothing worse. That's what I was told." Told by who? And here Del Crane hesitated. Even now. Even with the whole thing crashing down, the old animal fear of the Harlan money held his tongue one last second. Ethan took a step toward him. "Told by who, Crane?" "Miss Harlan." It came out of him in a rush, like vomit, like relief. "Rebecca Harlan. She found me in town 2 weeks back. Paid me. Half up front, half after. Said she wanted the girl humbled in front of everybody. Said a horse don't hold a grudge, and a girl in the dirt's a girl forgotten." He was sobbing openly now. "When the girl found the first cut and switched it back, I figured it was done. I figured I was clear. I was glad of it. Mr. Rollins, I swear I was glad. But then Miss Harlan's man come and said cut it again, or give back the money and answer to her, and I was scared, and I was drunk, and I did it. I cut it again." He sank to his knees in the dust. "And that boy, that little boy, I keep seeing him. I'll keep seeing him till I die." The yard erupted. It came up as a roar, the whole county at once, and several of the hands started for Del Crane with their fists balled, and it was Ethan who had the most cause of any man there to want Del Crane dead, who stepped in front of them and held up the strap and shouted them down. "No." His voice cracked across the yard like the snap of the leather itself. "No. There'll be no mob on my land. You hear me? You hear me, every one of you." He turned slow, holding them all back with his eyes. "This man's a coward and a fool, and he near killed a child, and he'll answer for it before a judge in a court of law like a Christian country does it. But there'll be no rope today, not on Rollins' ground." He looked down at the weeping man in the dirt. "Pruitt, tie his hands. Lock him in the smokehouse till the marshal can ride out." He don't get whiskey. He don't get supper. He gets to sit in the dark with what he done. A beat. Same as the rest of us have to. But it wasn't Del Crane the county was looking at now, because every soul in that yard had heard the name. Rebecca Harlan. And every head was turning slow toward the fine carriage where she sat with her gloved hands gripped white in her lap, and her face the color of bone, and the silence that fell then was a different kind of silence, heavier, colder, the silence of 100 people deciding all at once what they thought of a thing. Ethan walked toward the carriage. He walked slow, the cut strap in his hand, and the crowd parted to let him through, and he stopped at the carriage step and looked up at the woman he'd known since they were children. The woman half the county had figured he'd marry, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone leaned in to hear it, and that made it worse. "Is it true? Ethan?" Rebecca's voice was a thread. "Ethan, you can't possibly believe the word of a drunk, a thief, a man you know yourself is it true, Rebecca? He's lying to save his own neck. He'll say anything." "Then look at me." Ethan's eyes burned. "Look me in the face, Rebecca Harlan, the way you've looked at me since we were 10 years old, and tell me you didn't pay that man to cut my tack. Tell me plain. Tell me to my face, and I'll believe you over him. I will. I swear it." He waited. "Tell me." And Rebecca opened her mouth, and nothing came out. She could not do it. For all her cold, for all her scheming, Rebecca Harlan had been raised a lady, and some small remnant of a conscience, or simply a failure of nerve, closed her throat, and she sat there in her fine green dress with the whole county watching, and she could not look Ethan Rollins in the eye and lie, and her silence was a confession louder than any words. The crowd saw it. A sound went through them, low and ugly, and Cyrus Harlan came shoving up red-faced and bellowing through the crowd. He'd been at the far rail, he'd heard the name, he'd come at a run. "What in hell is this? What's this unholy noise, Rebecca? What have they—" He rounded on Ethan. "You, Rollins, you accuse my daughter. My daughter, on the word of a drunk hired hand." His finger jabbed the air. "You forget yourself, boy. You forget who holds your paper. $9,000 you owe this country, and 4 of it's mine. You understand me. $4,000 of Harlan money standing between you and ruin, and you'll stand here in the dirt and slander your money." Ethan's voice was very calm now. Deadly calm. "Yes. Let's speak of your money, Cyrus." And here came the twist that broke the Harlan's back, and it came not from Ethan's fist, but from his head, because Ethan Rollins had not built and held a ranch by being a man who could only feel. He could think. And he had been thinking hard and cold for the last 60 seconds. "You hold $4,000 of my paper," Ethan said loud now, loud enough for the whole county and every cattle investor in it. "That's true. And I've been a year working to pay it, and I've made every note but 2, and you know it because you keep the book." He took a step toward Cyrus. "But here's the thing about money, Cyrus. Money's only worth what folks believe it's worth. A man's note is only good as long as other men will deal with him. And a Harlan note." He turned slow to take in the whole crowd, every rancher and investor and merchant in 3 counties standing right there in his yard. "A Harlan note is only good as long as folks believe a Harlan is a person you can do honest business with." The silence rang. "Your daughter," Ethan went on, "paid a man to cut my tack and throw a woman in the dirt for sport. That man in his cowardice cut it twice, and a 6-year-old child, Samuel Pell, half of you know his mother, Samuel Pell, near died of it not 1 hour ago in this very corral. You all saw it. You all heard the strap go. You all watched that boy frozen in the dirt with a runaway horse coming down on him." He pointed the cut strap at Cyrus. "And the woman who paid for it sits in that carriage and can't look me in the eye and deny it." He let that land. "So here's what I reckon, Cyrus." Ethan's voice dropped, but it carried like a struck bell. "I reckon every man standing in this yard is asking himself right now a simple question. If the Harlans will do, this will pay a drunk to cut a man's tack in the dark, will gamble a child's life to spite a stable girl, then what won't they do? What's a Harlan handshake worth? What's a Harlan note worth? Would you lend with this family? Would you sell cattle to them? Would you let your daughter sit at their supper table? He looked around the crowd, and he saw it landing on face after face, saw the ranchers' eyes going hard, saw the merchants doing sums, saw the whole social and financial fabric of the Harlan fortune starting to come apart thread by thread in the noon sun. Because money's only paper, Cyrus. Reputation's the real coin out here, and your daughter just spent every cent of yours. Cyrus Harlan's red face had gone purple, then white, because he understood. He was a hard man and a greedy one, but he was not a stupid one, and he understood in that terrible moment exactly what his daughter had cost him. Not in dollars, but in the thing dollars rested on, the thing he'd spent 40 years building, the willingness of other men to trust a Harlan. He looked around the yard, and he saw it in every face. The Pells whose boy near died, the ranchers who'd shaken his hand last week, the investors who held paper alongside him, all of them looking at him now, the way folks look at a thing gone rotten. "You can call my note," Ethan said, almost gently. "Right now, today, $4,000 due. Ruin me. You've got the legal right." He nodded slow. "And every man in this yard will watch you do it. Watch you ruin the ranch whose owner just risked his neck to stop a mob from hanging your daughter's hired man without a trial. Watch you bankrupt the woman." He didn't look at Clara. He didn't have to. Who saved that child's life this very hour? Go on, call it, and see what a Harlan note's worth this side of Christmas. The crowd was dead silent, and Cyrus Harlan, cattle baron, holder of half the county's papermaster of $4,000 of Rollins debt, stood in the dirt of another man's yard and understood that he had lost. Not the money. The money he'd get one way or another. He'd lost the thing under the money. He'd lost his good name, and his daughter had spent it, and there was no buying it back. "Get in the carriage, Rebecca," he said. His voice had gone dead. "Get in the carriage, now, Father, now." Rebecca rose on shaking legs. But before she could climb up into the carriage, before the Harlans could flee the wreckage of their name, a voice stopped her. A clear, steady woman's voice, and the whole county turned because it was Clara. Clara had come up through the crowd, quiet blackjack's lead rope still in her hand, the horse following calm behind her, and she stood now at the foot of the carriage, looking up at Rebecca Harlan. And there was no triumph in her face. That was the thing the county would remember. There was no triumph at all. "Miss Harlan." Rebecca looked down at her, and her milk-white face twisted. "Don't you," she hissed. "Don't you dare stand there and pity me. You stable girl, you nothing. You came here with one trunk and a dead man's boots, and you—" "I'm not pitying you," Clara said. "I'm telling you something, and I'd have you hear it because I don't expect we'll speak again." She held the woman's eyes. "I know why you did it. You know nothing about me. I know you wanted him." Clara said it plain, not cruel, just true, and Rebecca flinched like she'd been struck. "Ethan, you've wanted him since you were girls. And I came along with nothing, with less than nothing, and he looked at me, and you couldn't bear it. I know. I'm not a fool, Miss Harlan, whatever you've called me." "Oh, she's une marinée." She paused. "But here's the thing you never understood. And it's why you'll never have what you wanted, no matter how much money your father holds. You thought love was a thing you win by tearing down the other person. You thought if you put me in the dirt, he'd see me low and want you instead." She shook her head slow. "That's not how it works. That's not how any of it works. You don't earn a man's heart by ruining a woman. You don't gentle a frightened thing by force. I learned that from horses, Miss Harlan, and from grief, and from a father who walked into a fire." Her voice softened, and somehow that was worse than any anger. "You could have been kind. You had every advantage. I never had money. Family name a place at his table since childhood. And you chose cruelty. And cruelty is the one thing in this world that always, always costs more than it buys." Rebecca Harlan stared down at her, and for one moment, something cracked in the cold, fine face. Something that might have been shame or grief, or the first dim understanding of a truth that came too late. Her mouth worked. No words came. Then her father said, "Rebecca, dead and flat," and she climbed into the carriage and did not look back. And Cyrus Harlan whipped up the horses, and they drove out of Rollins Ranch and out of the county's good graces, and in time out of the country altogether. But that's a story for another day. The carriage dwindled down the lane and was gone in its own dust, and the county let out its breath, and slowly the yard began to come back to life. The Pells came first. Samuel's mother, Hannah Pell, came across the yard with her boy on her hip, and her own face still wet, and she stopped in front of Clara, and she could not speak for a moment. She just looked at her, and then she reached out with her free hand and gripped Clara's arm hard. "You saved my son's life," Hannah Pell said. Her voice shook to pieces. "I watched that horse coming down on him, and I knew he was gone. I knew I'd just watched my boy die. And then you got between them, you put yourself—" She broke off crying. There's no thanks big enough in the world. But you've got a friend in Hannah Pell till the day I die, and so does every soul you ever care about. And if anyone in this county ever says a word against you again, they'll answer to me." "He's all right," Clara said gently. "That's all that matters. He's all right." And little Samuel, 6 years old, reached out from his mother's arms toward Blackjack, toward the horse that had near killed him, with the fearlessness only children have, and the great scarred warhorse lowered his head and let the child pat his nose soft as anything, and Hannah Pell made a sound and pressed her face into her boy's hair. And half the county was weeping now, and not ashamed of it. Then May came. May Rollins came down off the porch where she'd watched the whole thing. The proud, cold woman, and she crossed the yard slow and stiff with the whole county watching, and she stopped in front of Clara. And for a long moment the two women looked at each other. The old one who'd called her a burden and a drifter and a girl with designs, and the young one who'd proven her wrong at every turn. "I told you," May said, and her old voice was not steady, "that you owed this family your distance. I told you that you had designs. I told you a great many foolish, cruel things in that kitchen, 3 months of them, because I was frightened of you. Frightened of what you'd cost us. Frightened of how my son looked at you." She lifted her chin, and her old eyes were wet. "I was wrong. I was wrong about all of it, and I'm too old and too proud to have said so before now, and it took a child near dying to shake it out of me. So I'm saying it now, in front of everyone. You're not a burden. You're not a drifter. You're the finest thing that's come to this ranch since my husband died, and if you'll have us—" Her voice broke clean. "If you'll have us, I'd be proud to call you daughter." And Clara Whitaker, who had not cried through the cut strap, or the runaway, or the child in the dirt, or the whole long, terrible day, who had held herself in that cold, clear workplace through all of it, Clara cried now. She let go of the lead rope, and May caught her. The stiff, proud old woman caught her and held her, and Lily came flying off the rail and wrapped her arms around them both. And the three of them stood together in the yard in the hot summer sun, and the county looked on, a family being made. Ethan watched from a little distance. He did not come crowd in. He stood with the cut strap still in his hand, and he watched his mother hold the woman he loved, and his jaw worked. And there was something in his face that was not finished. Something held back. Something he had not yet done. He waited until the crowd thinned, until the wagons rolled out one by one, with the whole county carrying home the story they'd tell for 40 years, until the yard was near empty, and the long summer light came slanting gold and violet across the corral. He waited until May had taken Lily and Samuel and Hannah Pell inside for the pie that had been baking since 4 that morning, the pie nobody had been able to think about until now. And then Ethan Rollins walked over to where Clara stood alone at Blackjack's fence in the violet dusk, the horse beside her, and he stood next to her a long moment without speaking. "You knew," he said finally. "At dawn. You knew the strap was cut, and you didn't tell me. I told you why. Pride. Pride." Clara didn't flinch from it. "And I'll regret it the rest of my life. I made the wrong choice this morning, Ethan. The right one this afternoon, maybe, but the wrong one this morning, and a boy near died of my wrong one. I won't pretend otherwise. I won't let you pretend it for me." Ethan was quiet a while. "You want to know the truth?" he said at last. "I made the same kind of wrong choice once, the exact same kind. pride and fear and thinking I knew better. He looked out at the horse. The night Thomas died, the storm came up fast and the cattle were still out, and Thomas wanted to ride after them, and I told him no. I told him it was too dangerous. The storm was too bad. Leave the cattle, we'd find them in the morning. His voice had gone rough. And he laughed at me, called me an old woman, said he'd ride out on blackjack and have them in before the worst of it. And He stopped, swallowed. I got angry. My pride got up. He'd called me an old woman in front of the hands. So instead of forbidding him, instead of standing in front of that horse and refusing to let him go, I let my temper talk. I said, fine. I said, go on then, hotshot. Go break your fool neck, see if I care. His hands were shaking now. Those were the last words I ever said to my brother. See if I care. And he rode out into that storm on this horse, and the lightning came down, and blackjack threw him, and they found Thomas in the creek the next morning with his neck broke. He turned and looked at Clara, and his eyes were streaming. And I have spent 2 years blaming this horse because the only thing worse than blaming this horse was the truth. That I let him go. That I was too proud to stop him. That my last words to my brother were see if I care. Clara took his hand. And so you see, Ethan said, I've got no stones to throw at you for one prideful choice this morning. I've thrown mine. I'm still throwing them. The difference is, his voice cracked. The difference is, you ran toward the danger today to fix your wrong. I've spent 2 years running away from mine. You're not running now, Clara said softly. No. He looked at the horse. Blackjack stood quiet in the violet light, his scar pale, his great dark eye soft and watching. No, I reckon I'm not. And then Ethan Rollins did the thing. He let go of Clara's hand, and he stepped up to the corral gate. The gate he had not been able to walk through in 2 years. The gate his hand had sweated on every dawn for 2 weeks while his nerve broke at the threshold, and this time he lifted the latch, and he opened it, and he stepped inside. Clara didn't move, didn't speak, didn't help. This was his to do. Blackjack swung his head around. His ears came up. For one breathless moment, the old terror hung in the air between man and horse, 2 years of grief and blame, and a creak and a broken neck, and Ethan stood frozen just inside the gate with his heart slamming and the horse watching him. Then Ethan walked toward him. Slow, the way Clara had taught him without ever teaching him the way he'd watched her do it every dawn. Soft-shouldered, eyes low. No threat in him at all. Only a broken man come to make peace with the last living thing that had carried his brother. He crossed the pen one slow step at a time, and Blackjack did not rear, did not scream, did not strike the horse, only watched him come. Tense, trembling, but holding the 2 weeks of trust, holding even now. Ethan stopped at the horse's shoulder. He raised one shaking hand, and he laid it flat against the white scar, the same place Clara's hand always went, the place that meant safety. And he stood there with his palm on the scar of the horse that had carried his brother to his death. And Ethan Rollins bowed his head and began finally after 2 years to speak. I'm sorry, he whispered. His voice broke to pieces. I'm sorry. I blamed you. All this time I blamed you because it was easier than blaming me, but it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. You were scared. The lightning came down and you were scared, and you did what a scared thing does. And Thomas shouldn't have been on you in that storm, and that's not your doing, that's mine. I let him go. I let him go. He pressed his forehead against the horse's neck the way he'd seen Clara do, and his shoulders shook. I'm sorry, boy. I'm so sorry. And Thomas? His voice failed entirely, came back broken. Thomas, if you can hear me wherever you are, I'm sorry. I didn't mean see if I care. I cared. God help me. I cared so much I couldn't bear it. And I turned it into anger because anger was easier to carry than the missing of you. I'm sorry, little brother. I'm sorry. And Blackjack the killer horse, the war horse, the animal, no man had touched in 2 years, turned his great scarred head and pressed his soft muzzle against Ethan Rollins's chest, gentle as falling snow, and held it there, and let the man weep against his neck in the violet summer dusk. Clara stood at the open gate, with tears running down her own face, and did not say a word. Some things a man has to walk into alone. She'd only ever been able to stand at the fence and wait. But he'd walk through the gate himself the way she'd told him months ago. He'd have to, not for me, not for the county, for your brother. And he'd done it, and the wall he'd built around his heart after the storm came down at last, stone by stone in the gold and violet light, with his face buried in the neck of a horse that had forgiven him long before he could forgive himself. When at last Ethan lifted his head, his face was wet and ruined, and somehow younger than Clara had ever seen it, 2 years lighter, and he looked across the pen at her standing in the open gate. And he didn't wipe his eyes, and he didn't hide his face, and he said the only thing left in him to say. "Stay," he said. "Clara, don't go back to nothing. Don't ever go back to nothing again." He took a step toward her, his hand still resting on the horse's neck. "Stay here, with me, with us, not as charity, not as a hand, not as a debt repaid." His voice shook. "As my wife. If you'll have a fool who took 2 years and a near-dead child to learn what you knew the first morning you sat at this fence." And Clara Whitaker, in a dead man's boots in the violet light, with the whole long, terrible, blessed day behind her, looked at the broken man she'd watched put himself back together. And she smiled, and the smile broke clean across her wet face like sun coming up. "I reckon," she said, "I'll have him." They were married at the end of that summer, under the same hot sky that had watched her walk into the killer's pen, and the whole county came, not to watch her die this time, not to watch her humbled, but to watch her wed. And there is no sweeter turning than that. 1 year passed, and Rollins Ranch in that year became a thing folks talked about clear across the territory, but not the way they'd talked before. They used to whisper about the silence of the place, the cold, proud widow, the guarded son, the killer horse penned in the back corral. Now they spoke of it the way you speak of a place that's healed, and people came from 3 counties to bring it their broken things. Because Clara had opened her father's journals. She'd kept them through the fire and the debt, and the long road to nowhere kept them, when she had nothing else. And now she spread them open on the kitchen table that had once held her like a stranger, and she read them to Ethan by lamplight. 40 years of a horseman's hard-won wisdom, the breeding lines, the gentling methods, the patient, slow work her father had given his life to. And together, they rebuilt the Rollins horse program from the ground up the way it had been before Thomas died, before the silence better than it had ever been. The first ruined horse came in the spring. A rancher named Coltrane brought her a sorrel mare that had been beaten by a previous owner till she wouldn't let a soul near her would scream and strike at the sight of a bridle, and Coltrane had been told by every other hand in the county to put her down. He'd heard about the Rollins woman. He brought the mare on a long lead at the very end of a wagon, the animal lathered and wild-eyed, and he stood at the gate twisting his hat and said he'd pay whatever Clara asked if she could do anything at all, and if she couldn't, well, he understood nobody could. "Leave her with me a month," Clara said. "A month, ma'am, she's like to kill you in a week." "She's not going to kill me." Clara watched the mare with the cold, clear work eyes her father had given her. "She's going to scream at me and strike at me and tell me to go to the devil every morning for 2 weeks. And then one morning she's going to be too tired and too lonesome to keep it up, and that's the morning we'll start." She looked at Coltrane. "A month. Come back at the new moon." He came back at the new moon, and his sorrel mare followed Clara. Whitaker, Clara Rollins, now around the corral like a dog, soft-eyed, gentle, and Coltrane took off his hat and held it to his chest and could not speak for a full minute. And when he could, he said it was a miracle, and Clara said it was no such thing. "It's patience," she said. "It's just patience, Mr. Coltrane. There's no magic in it. A frightened thing isn't healed by force. It's healed by somebody who's willing to come back. Every morning, even when nothing's changed, especially then." She handed him the lead. "Your mare was never wicked. She was hurt, and she learned that men aren't to be trusted, and she learned it for good reason. All I did was prove her wrong, slow one dawn at a time." She rubbed the mare's neck. "Anybody could do it. Most folks just aren't willing to wait. But they came anyway, after Coltrane came with their broken horses and their hopeless cases and their animals that other men had given up on for killers, and Clara took them, all of them, the way her father had. And 3 months later, you'd see a child riding them down the Rollins lane. And that, more than the wedding, more than the riches restored, was the thing that healed the county's heart toward her completely. The woman they'd come to watch die had become the woman they came to for hope. And in the middle of it all stood Blackjack. He was no longer penned in the back corral. He ran with the others now in the wide pasture, and his scar was still there. You don't erase a scar. Clara always said, you just teach it to stop meaning what it used to mean. But the menace was long gone out of him, and the ranch children rode him, and he carried them gentle as a cradle. The war horse that had killed, that the whole county had once feared, now the surest mount on the place. Folks who came to buy stock always asked about him, the big black with the white scar. And Ethan would tell them the whole story, every word of it, the storm, and the silence, and the dawn work, and the cut strap, and the boy in the dirt, because Ethan Rollins had learned that grief locked away festers, and grief spoken heals, and he'd not lock another thing away as long as he lived. May Rollins lived to see all of it. She'd thawed clean through that summer, and the year that followed warmed her the rest of the way, and she, who had called Clara a burden and a drifter, now could not be kept from boasting of her daughter-in-law to every soul who'd hold still for it. She taught Clara the family recipes, the ones that had come down 4 generations, and Clara taught May to sit at the fence in the dawn and watch the horses, and the 2 women who'd started in ice ended in something near to love. When the first grandchild came, and it came before that second summer was out, a dark-haired girl they named Hope, because that was what had come back to the ranch. May Rollins held the baby and wept and said she'd lived too long and seen too much sorrow to have ever expected this much joy at the end of it, and that she was grateful, that she was so grateful that she'd been wrong about everything that mattered and lived long enough to be glad of it. Lily married a young rancher from the next county, over a good kind boy who'd loved her since the church socials, and Clara stood up beside her at the wedding, the way Lily had stood beside Clara and the 2 of them. The warm-hearted girl who'd believed first, and the woman she'd believed in stayed close as true sisters all their lives. And Del Crane. Del Crane stood his trial that autumn, and Ethan Rollins did a thing the county never forgot. He spoke for him. Not to free him, Del had cut the strap twice, and a child had near died, and there was a price to be paid, and Del paid it 2 years in the territorial prison. But Ethan stood up before the judge and said that this was a weak man, not an evil one, a man who'd done a wicked thing out of fear and need and bad company, and that he'd confessed of his own free will, when he could have run confessed, and named the one who'd paid him, knowing it would cost him everything. Ethan asked the court to weigh that. And the judge did, and Del Crane got 2 years instead of 10, and when he came out, he came back through the county, a changed man, sober, quiet, and Ethan Rollins, to the astonishment of everyone, gave him honest work mucking the Rollins stables, because Ethan had learned that a man who's done wrong and faced it square deserves a road back, same as a horse does. You forgave the man who near killed a child on your land, a neighbor said to him once, baffled. How? Because Clara forgave herself for the prideful choice that morning, Ethan said. And because I forgave myself for the night of the storm, and because that horse forgave me for 2 years of blame I laid on him that wasn't his to carry. He looked out at the pasture, at the big black grazing in the gold light with a child on his back. I figure if a horse can forgive a man ought to be able to manage it too. Holding a grudge is just blaming something living for a hurt so you don't have to carry it yourself. I'm done with that. I carried enough. We all did. As for the Harlans, they were gone. Cyrus had been right that money was money, and he'd get his note one way or another, and Ethan paid it. Every dollar paid off the whole 9,000 within the year, as the ranch came back strong. But Ethan had been right about the deeper thing. A Harlan handshake wasn't worth spit in that county anymore. The ranchers wouldn't deal with them. The investors pulled their business. Within 2 years, Cyrus Harlan had sold up and moved his family east where the story hadn't traveled, and Rebecca married some city man for his money and was said to be unhappy, and Clara, when she heard it, did not gloat. She only said it was a sorrowful thing to want the wrong thing so badly you'd burn the world for it, and never learn until too late that the wanting was the whole of your prison. You pity her, Ethan said. I do. Clara watched the horses. She had everything I didn't, and she threw it in the fire to spite a stable girl. There's no winning against a thing like that. There's only being grateful you're not it. She leaned against him. Cruelty's its own punishment, Ethan. It always was. It eats the one who carries it slow from the inside, and the rest of us just have to step out of the way and let it. The evenings, that's what Clara loved best. When the work was done, and the broken horses were settling, and the dusk came down hot and violet over the pasture, she and Ethan would walk out to the fence together, the way they'd sat together in the dark a lifetime ago, when the whole house was frozen, and the future was a thing nobody dared to hope for. And Blackjack would come to the fence to meet them the way he always came. Now his great scarred head reaching over the rail for the soft word and the gentle hand, and the three of them would stand together in the failing light. The woman who'd been nothing, the man who'd been broken, and the horse who'd been feared, all three of them mended all three of them home. You know what I think about? Ethan said one such evening, his arm around her. The baby asleep in the house behind them, and the horse warm and breathing under their hands. I think about that first day, the trial. You walking into his pen with the whole county laughing and me screaming at the fence that you couldn't control that war horse. He shook his head slow. I was so sure I was right. So sure you were going to die. And you turned around and you told me you said you weren't going to die, and neither was he. He looked at her. How'd you know truly? How'd you know it had come right? Clara was quiet a long moment, her hand on the white scar. I didn't know, she said finally. Not for certain. Nobody ever knows for certain. She looked out at the pasture, at the year that lay behind them, at the long road from the fire to this fence. But I knew the other thing. I knew that if I stood at the fence and shouted, nothing would ever change. The horse would stay penned, you'd stay frozen, I'd stay nothing, and the fear would win the way. Fear always wins when everybody's too scared to walk through the gate. She turned and looked up at him in the violet dusk. So I walked through it. Not because I knew it would come right. Because I knew it never would if I didn't. She smiled slow and sure. That's all courage ever is, Ethan. It's not knowing you'll be safe. It's walking toward the frightened thing anyway, because somebody has to, and being willing for it to be you. Ethan pulled her close and the horse breathed soft against them, and the last of the gold light went down over Rollins Ranch. And there it is, the whole of it. The truth, that woman and man and horse carried up out of grief and into the light. And it is this, and you remember it. Some wounds in this life are too deep ever to be conquered or beaten or forced into healing, and the ones who try to master them by strength only break themselves against them. But every wound, every last one, no matter how old or how scarred or how feared, every wound can be witnessed and understood and loved slowly back into peace by someone with the courage to walk through the gate and the patience to come back every single dawn. Clara Whitaker knew it the morning she walked into that pen, and she proved it true before the whole county, and she lived it every day of the long, good life that followed. That is how the broken are healed. That is the only way they ever have been. And that is the end of the story.